Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carter.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carter. Today is Saturday, May 16th, 2026. And tonight's episode is all about From Rome to the Cloud, the rise of the digital beast system. Now, civilizations rarely recognize when they are changing forms. People notice wars, elections, crashes, and revolutions. But the deeper transformations happen quietly beneath ordinary life. Roads become networks, markets become platforms, libraries become clouds, human memory becomes searchable data, and the world slowly reorganizes itself around systems so convenient and interconnected that most people no longer notice how dependent they have become upon them. A civilization once built on land, labor, and local identity increasingly operates through algorithms, databases, digital verification, and machine-managed participation. Well, the structure governing humanity is no longer merely political. It is computational. Now, the old empires controlled territory because territory controlled survival. Rome mastered roads, taxation, census systems, law, and commerce because whoever controlled infrastructure controlled civilization itself. The modern world inherited that same administrative logic, but buried it beneath technology. Daily life now flows through systems operating above nations and outside traditional political visibility. Communication moves through platforms. Commerce moves through digital networks. Identity moves through databases, and visibility moves through algorithms. Participation itself increasingly depends upon machine-readable existence. Well, the frightening part is how merciful the system appears while it expands. Every layer promises convenience, safety, speed, efficiency, and relief from uncertainty. Artificial intelligence promises optimization. Digital identity promises security. Smart infrastructure promises sustainability. Automation promises abundance. And most people willingly integrate deeper into these systems because they solve immediate problems. Dependence grows slowly when comfort replaces resistance. The machine civilization does not initially conquer humanity through fear. It persuades humanity through usefulness. Well, Scripture describes a kingdom unlike those before it. A kingdom reaching into commerce, allegiance, participation, and identity itself. The modern world now possesses the infrastructure capable of supporting such a system for the first time in human history. The danger is not technology alone. The danger is humanity gradually surrendering authorship, discernment, and trust to systems promising order apart from God. A civilization that once sought wisdom through covenant increasingly seeks salvation through computation. So that's our show tonight. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number one warrior is Scorpion. Scorpion says, "Hey, Pastor and Warrior family, glad to be back. James, I hope you enjoyed your time away and scored some gold." I did, and I did score a lot of gold. Not enough to pay the bills, but enough to want to have me go back, you know. This time I've upgraded my little area. I have now these outdoor gardener boxes. I brought 3 of them, and so all of my equipment can stay in there while I'm gone. It makes me feel a heck of a lot better because rain and everything else comes, and I had it under tarps before, and holy cow, yeah, I had to replace some equipment just due to thunderstorms and rain, and well, it just happens because, well, the tarp flew over and everything got wet, and it just sat there for a couple weeks, and well, when I finally got to it, I shook my head and went, not good. But thanks for asking. I had a great time too. Number 2 warrior is Boots Hafner, the Sparkman splee for himself, the powder room dude, the guy who is in the cave smoking Johnny. Hey, what's going on, Boots? Boots says, welcome back, James, and hello, warrior family. Glad to see y'all here, and let's hit that thumbs up button. And don't forget to tell a friend about James's very own award-winning detox formula, elitepotion.com. Yes, thank you very much. It is elitepotion.com. This is Whimsy Worm Wash and Nickel Nixer Elixir. We're going to be changing the look and feel of the company because, what I came up with didn't work too well. So we have a new website. Go and take a look at it, elitepotion.com. And we're going to go more in the traditional route of just looking dull and bland because, I was I was marketing the product as pointing the fingers at the industrial complex and how heavy metals and parasites are basically in our guts and creating all kinds of problems. And I was pointing my fingers at the oil companies and how oil isn't helping because our guts don't know how to break down and kill the parasites anymore because the oil inside of our guts turns our gut bacteria back upside down. Well, that kind of marketing, I don't know, it just didn't work. So we're just going to go basically to simple as this. There's heavy metals inside processed food, and we eat it. And they cut little tiny veins in your stomach. And you eat a salad, there's parasites in everything and all kinds of plant-based foods. And those parasites, small enough, can get right through those little tiny veins in your stomach. And then if they find somewhere to stop and colonize, it's problematic. And the reason why people have bowel movement problems and people have, issues with their guts and all of that's related to parasites and heavy metals. Get rid of them. And you'll get rid of probably most of America's problems because that's what's happening. That's what I even researched and found out, and that's why I created the company. And I also created it to see if it would help my son with autism. And it actually, it really did. It made him calm down a lot, but not enough to stop the self-injurious behavior. And we learned that it wasn't anything at all other than he just wanted to go and do things every single day and night, and we just didn't have the resources and people available to do such a thing. And now he gets that, and he's slowed down on it big time. So he's doing better. Thank you very much. Guys, thank you so much for being on the show. Let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty
Yeah, it's a shitty opinion. Bill Cassidy loses Senate primary and another major win for Trump. The left's freaking out because, here's what happened. I've told you guys this in the past. USAID, when they cut all funding for that stopped all funding for the Democrats to put in district attorneys, judges, and senators, congressmen, and governors. They were using American taxpayers to do that. And so when all that funding went away, the Democrat National Committee has no money to fund these efforts to get their people in. So they're forced to compete using their own money. And, nobody really likes how the Democrats are running things. So it's looking like the Democrats are really going to have a problem for the next, maybe 10 to 20 years, because you're going to start to see a lot of long-time blue states turn red, because now the people get a fighting chance to vote with their real votes. And on top of that, hey, if the CARES Act or what is it? I forgot. Some kind of act that's going to come in saying if you're going to vote, you need to prove that you're a citizen. If that passes, then the Democrats are lost for a very long time. We will see, because I know the people are not interested in giving shit away for free anymore because it doesn't work. Communism doesn't work. Socialism can work if you don't have a communist leadership. But regardless, all isms crash eventually. Trump returns from China with stability and a stalemate, so China's not ready to negotiate the table yet. This is probably going to be the second time, or this is the first time of many that Trump's going to be flying over there. And the less oil China gets, basically, I think we still have another 100 days before China's going to seriously start feeling the pinch of the blockade at Hormuz. And when they start feeling that pinch, then they're going to have to negotiate. That's just how it is. Trump says Iran war worth economic pain, and these rural voters agree. Well, according to the USA Today, well, like I said, they cut off all of the free funding of money going towards the Democrat Party so they could pay off all kinds of people. Well, that doesn't work anymore. And hey, the Bible says your lies will be exposed. Well, that's what's happening right now. All of the Democrats and their cheating. Not to say Republicans don't; they cheat too as well. But they haven't gone. They haven't gone to the extremes of allowing immigrants in and then using their votes. That's pretty extreme, in my opinion. Ballroom security money nixed by Senate parliamentarian. So ballroom security money, but not the ballroom money. So it's like we're gonna still go with the ballroom, but we're not gonna put security on it. I don't know. Anyway, and more elections results. Oh my God, do we have to really look at all this crap? I really don't. I don't have a map. It says click here for election results and doesn't even show any election results. Colorado governor faces backlash over clemency for 2020 election denier. Tina, what's her name? Well, of course, because Colorado is, under the control of China. That's pretty much what it is. Colorado's a big hub. It's an international airport. It's the biggest airport, really. And China has to have control of that for shipping, right? So airports and ports. But anything that says port, and that it's either the East that controls it or the West. Well, the West is gaining a foothold big time because Trump is not allowing China to get a foothold in America anymore. That's all going away. I mean, is that a good thing? I think so, long term. Bad thing? Well, bad thing for China because they're gonna be hurting for money. And that's breaking news. All right, when we come back tonight, we're going to be going over the proof. From Rome to the cloud, and the rise of the digital beast system. What Pete Hegseth and Trump were all talking about, they're going to build a new area.
We are being lied to about our sovereignty, about our health, about birth, and about what's actually best for our families. And most women don't even realize it until they're already in the system. Hi, my name is Lisa, the Sovereign Woman. I'm going live every single day for 31 days at 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on YouTube and TikTok. This is for the woman who knows there has to be another way. A way to give birth without fear, without being controlled, without giving up her authority. Inside these lives, I'm teaching you how to surrender to God, trust your body, and step into a truly sovereign and fearless birth. Not from hype, not from rebellion, but from truth. So if you feel that pull, like something isn't right, like you were made for more than what you've been told, come join me. I'll see you live.
Every year, millions of Americans sign a contract they don't even know exists. They think it's just another tax return, but that signature means something far deeper. It starts with that first job at 16. The system takes a piece of her check, then promises to give some back if she signs the return. Every April 15th, the same cycle repeats, not by law, but by belief. The system didn't bind them, their own signature did. Learn the truth at unincorporatedAssociations.com.
All right, we're back. So, from Rome to the cloud, and the rise of to the Digital Beast System. Guys, there's enough evidence out there to really support that the Technocracy Inc., that little group of Canadians that started back in the 30s, who said the world needs to be ran on algorithms, not a constitution or a king. Well, if they went underground, they did a good job because they hit it well. However, there are still enough, I would say, evidence, little pieces that they left behind, and it's actually happening. What I'm trying to say is that map that I showed you guys a while back of the Americas and what America is going to be in control of. It's going to be a hub, and it does link to the 1970s Club of Rome map. Excuse me, I'm burping. Club of Rome map, okay, where they want to divide the world into 10 sections, 10 kings, 10 leaders, 10 places with their own resources, etc. That's what I'm saying is happening. So yes, we are living in the end of days. However, we're not there yet, but that's the goal. And I found the evidence to it. So most people still think the power looks the way it looked 100 years ago. Oh no. They imagine governments, armies, flags, politicians, and visible authority. They imagine control arriving loudly, violently, and all at once. But civilization changed forms while most of the world was distracted. You know, Britney Spears and all that crap. Well, the structure surrounding human life no longer operates primarily through visible force. It operates through systems people voluntarily participate in every single day. The modern world is governed less by direct commands and more by invisible dependency. Rome understood something ancient empires always understood. Real power does not begin with violence. Violence only protects the structure already built underneath the civilization. Well, Rome mastered roads, taxation, census systems, law, trade, and identity. The empire became the mechanism through which daily life flowed. To participate in commerce, travel, citizenship, protection, and economic stability meant participating inside Rome's administrative structure. Well, most people living under the empire experienced Rome not through soldiers, but through infrastructure. Well, the modern world inherited that same logic and digitized it. Roads became fiber networks. Census systems became databases. Currency became digital transactions. Public squares became platforms. Libraries became cloud systems. Human interaction itself became measurable information flowing through machines. Can you believe it? Now, civilization is no longer merely industrial. Civilization has become computational. Daily life increasingly depends upon systems most people neither control nor fully understand. The shift happened slowly enough that it felt natural. Phones became extensions of memory. Platforms became extensions of communication. Algorithms became extensions of visibility. And artificial intelligence became extensions of judgment and prediction. Well, every layer promised convenience. Every layer removed friction. Humanity, well, accepted deeper integrations because the system appeared useful, efficient, and harmless. Well, dependence rarely feels dangerous while it's still comfortable. The old world feared kings and dictators, while the modern world trusts systems. And that is the real transformation happening beneath politics. More decisions are increasingly mediated through algorithms, predictive systems, automated filtering, identity verification, behavioral analytics, and machine-managed infrastructure. Well, human beings are gradually becoming machine-readable participants inside integrated digital environments. Identity itself is becoming synchronized through systems that connect communication, finance, commerce, movement, and participation together. Now, technocracy. Once imagined civilization managed scientifically through engineers and system administrators. Cybernetics transformed that idea into feedback systems capable of prediction and adaptation. Systems theory reframed the world itself as an interconnected machine requiring coordination and optimization. Well, the internet connected populations globally while cloud infrastructure centralized information into massive computational architectures. Artificial intelligence now sits on top of all of it, tuning and turning behavior into prediction and prediction into influence. So most people still see these systems separately. Social media appears separate from banking. Banking appears separate from artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence appears separate from digital identity. And digital identity appears separate from smart infrastructure. But the systems are converging quietly underneath the surface. Communication, economics, visibility, identity, and participation are slowly becoming interoperable layers of one integrated environment. The architecture for centralized synchronization is already being built. So the frightening part is not that the machine civilization hides itself. The frightening part is how desirable it actually appears. The system promises speed, connection, safety, optimization, efficiency, convenience, sustainability, and order. Well, every crisis becomes justification for deeper integration. Every fear becomes permission for more monitoring, and every inconvenience becomes an argument for automation. Well, humanity increasingly trades autonomy for frictionless participation because the machine rewards dependence with comfort. So Scripture warned about a kingdom unlike those before it, a kingdom capable of reaching into buying, selling, allegiance, and participation itself. Previous empires never possessed the infrastructure necessary to synchronize humanity at planetary scale. The modern world does. Data centers now hold more influence than many nations. Artificial intelligence increasingly shapes visibility, behavioral, and information flow. Cloud systems mediate communication, commerce, and identity simultaneously. Civilization is approaching a condition where participation itself may depend upon authorization through integrated systems. So the deeper danger here is spiritual, because humanity increasingly seeks salvation through infrastructure instead of God. The machine promises solutions for weakness, disorder, uncertainty, scarcity, loneliness, conflict, and even mortality itself. Yeah, they're trying to upload your soul into a machine. Well, artificial intelligence promises guidance. Systems promise stability, networks promise unity, and technology increasingly presents itself not merely as a tool, but as a mechanism through which humanity can transcend limitation and govern itself collectively. A civilization once grounded in covenant slowly shifts towards dependence upon systems designed to mediate reality itself. Now, the beast system does not suddenly appear from nowhere. A world capable of supporting it must first exist, hence the data centers. The roads must be built. The infrastructure must be integrated. Identity must be machine-readable, through Oracle. And commerce must become digitally mediated. Populations must become behaviorally predictable. And most importantly, humanity must become psychologically willing to trust the system more than God. That is the transformation unfolding all around us right now. So, for most of human history, empires rose and fell through physical conquest. Kingdoms expanded by controlling land, rivers, ports, and trade routes, because whoever controlled movement controlled survival. But the deeper strength of an empire was never merely its army. Armies could conquer territory, but infrastructure allowed civilizations to endure. Roads, tax systems, standardized law, census records, and currency networks created stability across populations large enough that most people would never personally encounter the emperor himself. The empire became an invisible structure operating underneath ordinary life. Rome mastered this better than any civilization before it. The Roman road system connected military movement, commerce, taxation, communication, and administration into one integrated framework. Merchants relied upon it. Citizens relied upon it. Governors relied on it. The roads were not simply transportation, they were synchronization. Rome could move information, goods, money, and authority across enormous distances because the infrastructure unified the empire into one operational system. So the census became another critical piece of Roman power. Census, you gather how many people you got and information about them. Remember when King David did that in the Bible? He went ahead and did a census, and God was upset with him. Didn't want him to do a census, right? Because King David was trying to find out how much power and how big he was. And that's evil. Rome needed populations to become measurable. Taxation required records. Military conscription required records. Citizenship required records. Land ownership required records. The empire could not govern what it could not identify. People often imagine ancient census systems as simple population counts, but they were rarely mechanisms of administrative visibility. Rome transformed millions of individuals into governable categories. Identity became tied to participation inside the imperial structure. Law completed the system. Rome standardized legal frameworks across territories that previously operated through fragmented customs and tribal systems. Contracts, trade agreements, taxation, punishment, citizenship rights, and property ownership became increasingly integrated under one administrative order. Well, this allowed Rome to scale civilization beyond local identity. Participation no longer depended entirely on tribe, village, or family. Participation increasingly depended upon the empire itself. Rome became the mediator between the individual and civilization. So most people living under Rome did not wake up every morning thinking about imperial conquest. They thought about roads, taxes, markets, permits, courts, and commerce. Empire functioned through daily dependence. Civilization itself flowed through Roman systems. And that is why Rome survived so long, even after military decline began. The administrative structure remained stronger than the political personalities ruling it. And the empire became larger than the emperor. Think about it like this. Trump understands this, and he's building an infrastructure. Even though our military is in decline, he's building an infrastructure of census, but it's through artificial intelligence. And it's the next big thing. It's the next control mechanism. We will eventually replace the Constitution with an algorithm of living. Now, modern people often misunderstand how deeply Western civilization inherited Roman administrative thinking. The idea that large populations can be coordinated through standardized systems did not disappear when Rome weakened politically. It evolved through Europe, through nation states, through industrialization, and eventually through technological civilization itself. Administrative logic survived because scalable systems are extraordinarily effective at organizing human behavior. The structure continued evolving even when the symbols changed. Industrial civilization accelerated this transformation dramatically. Machines increased production. Railroads compressed geography. Telegraph systems compressed communication. Bureaucracies expanded, governments became larger, financial systems became more interconnected. Now, human populations grew denser and more economically dependent upon infrastructure, and civilization increasingly operated through systems rather than personal relationships. Participation slowly shifted away from local community and toward institutional coordination. Well, the modern world inherited Rome's administrative architecture, but digitized it. Roads became fiber networks, census systems became databases, currency became digital transactions, imperial records became cloud storage, communication became platform-mediated visibility. So the structure underneath civilization no longer relies primarily on stone, paper, or physical territory. It relies on information systems. And that is one of the biggest transformations in human history, and most people barely recognize it while living inside it. Well, the frightening part is that the infrastructure feels neutral while it's expanding. Roads feel practical, databases feel efficient. Platforms feel convenient while digital identity feels secure. Cloud systems feel useful. Every layer appears rational when viewed individually, but collectively they reorganize civilization around centralized systems of participation and visibility. Humanity increasingly experiences reality itself through infrastructures operated by institutions most people will never see directly. So Rome needed roads because information moved slowly. The modern world moves information instantly, which means modern infrastructure reaches deeper into human life than any empire before it. Ancient Rome could not monitor daily thought, communication, movement, behavior, purchasing habits, emotional patterns, or even social influence in real time. Well, the modern world increasingly can. The old empire governed territory. The emerging system governs information, identity, visibility, and participation simultaneously. So that is why the comparison between Rome and modern computational civilization matters so much. The issue is not whether Rome secretly survived unchanged. The issue is that the logic of scalable administration civilization continued evolving until it merged with digital infrastructure itself. Now, ancient empires centralized roads, law, taxation, and commerce because those systems created control over participation. Modern civilization centralizes data, identity, computation, and behavioral visibility for the same reason. The tools changed. The governing logic remained remarkably similar. So the Industrial Revolution changed far more than manufacturing. It changed humanity's relationship with time, labor, identity, and value itself. Before industrialization, most human life moved according to natural rhythms. Work followed seasons, daylight, weather, harvest cycles, and local community needs. Production was slower, decentralized, and deeply tied to physical human effort. A farmer, blacksmith, or carpenter, or even a merchant still controlled much of the pace of daily life because labor remained connected to the individual. Machines shattered that relationship. Factories introduced a world where efficiency became more important than rhythm. Time itself became measurable in ways human civilization had never experienced before. Clocks became instruments of production rather than simple tools for awareness. Human beings increasingly adapted themselves to the machine instead of the machine adapting to humanity. Labor became segmented, standardized, timed, and optimized for maximum output. Well, the psychological transformation underneath industrialization is often ignored because people focus only on economics. The deeper shift was philosophical. Civilization slowly began treating human society as a process capable of technical optimization. Factories became laboratories for efficiency. Managers studied movement, timing, repetition, and labor output to eliminate waste. Productivity became the moral center of industrial civilization because survival increasingly depended upon industrial growth and competitive production. Frederick Taylor's theories of scientific management accelerated this transformation dramatically. Taylor believed labor itself could be engineered scientifically. Human motion could be measured. Tasks could be broken into repeatable systems. Production could be optimized through analysis rather than tradition or instinct. Workers increasingly became interchangeable components inside larger operational systems. Well, the machine no longer simply amplified human behavior. Human labor itself became mechanized. So this altered civilization far beyond factories. Once efficiency becomes the organizing principle of production, it naturally expands into administration, education, transportation, military logistics, and government systems. Industrial society rewarded measurable outcomes because measurable systems scaled more effectively. Bureaucracies expanded because large populations required coordination. Data collection expanded because management required visibility. Human beings increasingly became participants inside systems designed around optimization rather than relationship. Railroads accelerated this transition even further. Rail systems required synchronization across enormous geographic distances. Schedules had to align, supply chains had to coordinate, communication systems had to operate rapidly and accurately. Industrial civilization became dependent upon integrated infrastructure networks operating continuously at scale. And this was one of the first moments in history where society itself began functioning like a machine. Individual communities increasingly lost autonomy because economic survival depended upon participation inside interconnected industrial systems. So the rise of industrial cities intensified the transformation. Massive populations concentrated into urban centers where labor, transportation, utilities, and commerce all required centralized coordination. Human life became increasingly mediated through institutions rather than local relationships. Schools prepared populations for industrial discipline. Governments expanded administrative oversight. Financial systems centralized capital. Industrial civilizations rewarded conformity to system requirements because the systems themselves became too large to function without predictability and standardization. Now, most people still viewed this transformation positively because industrialization genuinely increased production and material abundance. Machines reduced physical labor, transportation accelerated trade, electricity transformed communication and manufacturing, medical systems advanced, industrial civilization created unprecedented technological growth, but hidden beneath the visible progress was a quieter shift. Humanity increasingly reorganized itself around the need of systems rather than the needs of people. And this is where the foundations of technocratic thinking truly begin emerging. Industrial civilization produced levels of complexity previous generations could not manage through traditional political structures alone. Factories, rail systems, financial institutions, utilities, communications networks, and growing urban populations all required coordination on scales never before experienced. The world was becoming too interconnected and too mechanized for older forms of governance to comfortably manage. So the machine introduced a new philosophy without people, or most people, even realizing it. If production could be optimized scientifically, then perhaps transportation could as well. Perhaps economies could as well. Perhaps governments could as well. Perhaps civilization itself could become a scientifically managed system. Well, industrialization slowly trained humanity to believe that complex human problems could be solved through engineering, administration, measurement, and technical coordination. Well, the machine became more than just a tool. It became a model for civilization itself. The spiritual danger inside this transformation remained mostly invisible because industrial civilization initially improved material life. But once society begins viewing humanity primarily through productivity, efficiency, and measurable output, people gradually become abstractions inside systems rather than image bearers created by God. Identity shifts away from covenant, family, and community toward labor value and system participation. So civilization slowly becomes organized around operational performance instead of human stewardship. Well, that shift never stopped evolving. Industrial civilization taught humanity to trust systems capable of organizing complexity. And the machine age normalized centralized coordination. So the next stage would ask an even larger question. If machines could optimize factories and infrastructure, could experts eventually optimize civilization itself? Well, that question opened the door to technocracy, systems governance, and eventually the computational civilization emerging today. By the early 20th century, industrial civilization had become so large and interconnected that many thinkers no longer believed that traditional political systems could manage it effectively. Factories stretched across continents, electrical grids expanded into cities, transportation systems connected regions once isolated by geography. Financial markets moved faster than governments could react. Industrial complexity created a new class of people who increasingly believed society itself should be managed scientifically rather than politically. So technocracy emerged directly from this environment. The movement did not initially present itself as tyranny or dictatorship. It presented itself as efficiency. Its supporters argued that politicians, elections, and financial systems were outdated remnants of an earlier world incapable of governing an advanced industrial civilization. Engineers, scientists, and technical administrators increasingly viewed themselves as better suited to coordinate society because they understood infrastructure, production, energy, and systems management. Now, Howard Scott, the leader of Technocracy Inc., became one of the central figures in this movement. Technocracy Inc. proposed reorganizing North America into what it called Technate, a continental system managed through scientific administration rather than political negotiation. Well, the movement believed civilization could be measured, optimized, and coordinated through engineered principles. Energy, production, transportation, agriculture, and labor would all become integrated components inside one operational structure. Society itself would function like an intelligently managed machine. And one of the most important ideas inside technocracy was energy accounting. Instead of money functioning as the primary organizing mechanism of civilization, technocrats proposed measuring economic activity through energy consumption and production. Human civilization would be managed according to technical efficiency and resource coordination rather than markets, tradition, or political compromise. Carbon credits. This was one of the earliest major attempts to transform society into a measurable systems environment. Most people today have never read the original technocracy material, and because of that, many misunderstand what made the movement significant. The real importance was not whether every proposal succeeded. The importance was the underlying worldview. Technocracy treated civilization as an engineering problem. Human populations became operational variables inside larger systems requiring optimization, coordination, and management. Politics increasingly appeared inefficient compared to technical administration. Well, the movement emerged during a period of economic instability, industrial expansion, and growing distrust in traditional political institutions. Technocrats believed industrial society had already outgrown older governance structures, the black nobility. Well, the machine age required machine-aged administration. Engineers understood systems, engineers understood infrastructure, engineers understood production and logistics. Well, the technocratic worldview argued that expertise should replace political conflict because civilization itself had become too complex for ordinary democratic processes. Well, this was one of the most important psychological shifts in modern history. Authorities slowly began migrating away from wisdom, tradition, and representation toward technical specialization. The expert became the new priesthood of industrial civilization. Complex systems increasingly required credentialed managers capable of understanding infrastructure invisible to ordinary populations. Most people no longer understood the systems governing their lives, which made dependence upon technical authority grow even stronger. The frightening part is how rational technocracy sounded on the surface. Industrial civilization genuinely was becoming more complex. Electrical systems, transportation networks, resource distribution, industrial production, and economic coordination all required enormous levels of expertise. The technocrats were not entirely wrong about the scale of the challenge. The danger emerged in the assumption that human civilization could ultimately be reduced to measurable systems, requiring optimization rather than moral stewardship. While technocracy also introduced another critical idea that still shapes the modern world: continental systems thinking. The movement viewed North America not primarily as separate nations, but as one integrated operational region connected through energy, infrastructure, transportation, and industrial production. Borders mattered less than systems coordination. And this was an early form of planetary systems thinking that would later emerge through cybernetics, global governance theory, and computational civilization. The movement never fully took political control, but its deeper assumptions survived and migrated into other fields. Systems theory inherited the idea that civilization could be managed scientifically. Cybernetics inherited the idea that societies function through measurable feedback systems. Global governance institutions inherited the idea that interconnected complexity required coordinated management. Artificial intelligence now inherits the same foundational belief that large systems become governable through data, prediction, and optimization. And most importantly, technocracy normalized the belief that human behavior, economics, infrastructure, and social organization could all become machine-readable environments. Well, civilization slowly transformed from something lived into something modeled. And the modern world increasingly trusts dashboards, matrix, analytics, simulations, predictive systems, and algorithmic forecasting because industrial civilization conditioned humanity to believe that measurable systems are more reliable than human intuition, which is why everyone's going to AI now for all their questions instead of Google. And it started with Google. And before then, it started with Yahoo. Progresses. The spiritual danger hidden inside technocracy was subtle because it appeared practical rather than ideological. The movement did not openly attack God. It did reposition salvation into systems management. Order would come through coordination. Stability would come through optimization. Human problems would increasingly be solved through administration, engineering, and technical control. Well, the machine quietly became a substitute for wisdom, and humanity slowly began trusting systems to govern reality itself. So the Second World War accelerated the transformation of civilization more rapidly than most people realize. War forced governments, militaries, engineers, mathematicians, and scientists to solve problems at scales never before encountered in human history. Entire continents depended upon logistics, communication systems, weapons coordination, industrial production, transportation timing, radar systems, intelligence analysis, and predictive calculations operating continuously under extreme pressure. While human civilization entered an age where survival increasingly depended upon systems capable of processing information faster than individual human judgment alone. Now, out of this environment emerged cybernetics. Most people have heard the word without understanding its significance. Cybernetics was not merely about machines. It was about control, communication, feedback, and prediction within complex systems. Norbert Wiener and others began studying how machines, organisms, governments, and societies all relied upon feedback loops to regulate behavior and maintain stability. Well, information itself became the center of civilization. This changed everything because machines were no longer viewed simply as mechanical tools. Machines became adaptive systems capable of monitoring conditions, receiving feedback, adjusting behavior, and optimizing outcomes. Well, a thermostat became one of the simplest examples. It measures temperature, compares reality against a target condition, and modifies behavior accordingly. Well, cybernetics proposed that larger systems, economies, militaries, infrastructures, even societies, could potentially function through similar feedback processes. So the implications extended far beyond engineering. Human behavior increasingly became interpretable through systems logic. Communications became measurable, prediction became measurable, social organization became measurable, and civilization itself increasingly resembled a nervous system, transmitting information between interconnected components. Cybernetics transformed the machine from industrial hardware into informational architecture. So wartime operations research pushed these ideas even further. Governments began using mathematical models, simulations, and statistical data to optimize military decisions, logistics, resource allocation, transportation, and strategic planning. Entire populations became variables inside predictive systems. Large-scale management increasingly depend upon data flows and feedback analysis rather than intuition alone. Thus, human complexity began entering machine logic. So after the war, these systems theories migrated into universities, corporations, governments, think tanks, and intelligence agencies. And the same principles used to coordinate military operations began influencing economics, urban planning, communication systems, management science, and social engineering. Civilization itself increasingly appeared governable through information systems, and the machine civilization became less physical and more computational. This is one of the most important turning points in modern history because cybernetics quietly transformed how humanity understood reality itself. Earlier industrial civilizations informed, or earlier industrial informations optimized production. Cybernetics optimized information flow. So the focus shifted from factories toward communications, prediction, adaptation, and behavioral coordination. The machine was no longer merely external infrastructure. Human beings themselves increasingly became informational entities operating inside interconnected systems. Project CyberSyn in Chile revealed how far these ideas could extend into governance. Long before the internet age, cybernetic theorists attempted building real-time economic management systems using communication networks, feedback monitoring, predictive analysis, and centralized coordination. Factories transmitted information to centralized systems designed to monitor production and adjust responses dynamically. So civilization itself was beginning to be imagined as a live operational network. Well, the scary part is how naturally these systems expanded once computers entered the picture. Computers dramatically increased the ability to process information, to model behavior, monitor infrastructure, and simulate outcomes. Well, every advancement in computational power strengthened the belief that complex human systems could eventually be coordinated through machines. And cybernetics became the intellectual bridge between industrial civilization and digital civilization. So the modern world still operates inside assumptions inherited directly from cybernetics. Social media platforms rely on behavioral feedback systems, and artificial intelligence relies on predictive adaptation. Thus, financial markets rely on algorithmic modeling, and smart cities that are coming rely on sensor feedback loops. So recommendation systems continuously monitor human responses to optimize engagement and influence. Thus, entire populations increasingly operate inside environments shaped by machine learning feedback architectures. So the spiritual danger became deeper here because cybernetics quietly repositioned humanity inside systems of continuous observation and adjustment. Human behavior increasingly became something to model, predict, optimize, and regulate. The machine no longer merely served as civilization. Civilization itself began adapting to the machine. And human beings slowly became components inside feedback-driven environments designed to shape participation, visibility, and behavior without most people ever recognizing the architecture surrounding them. Now, by the late 20th century, the world had become so interconnected that many institutions no longer viewed national governments as sufficient units for understanding civilization. Industrial production crossed borders. Energy systems connected continents. Pollution ignored geography. Financial markets moved globally, and population growth accelerated. Resource consumption intensified, and the machine civilization created levels of complexity so large that some thinkers began viewing the entire planet as one integrated operational system. Well, the Club of Rome in the 70s emerged directly out of this environment. Most people only know the organization through internet rumors or fragmented references, but the deeper significance of the Club of Rome was its systems worldview. The group gathered scientists, economics, industrialists, policy thinkers, and system theorists who believed humanity had entered a new stage of civilization where planetary coordination would eventually become necessary. The old nation-state framework increasingly appeared too fragmented for managing global complexity. So the limits to growth became one of the organization's most influential works. Using computer modeling, researchers attempted to simulate interactions between population growth, industrial production, resource depletion, food systems, pollution, and economic expansion. Well, this was one of the first major movements in history where computers were used to model civilization itself as an interconnected planetary mechanism. Humanity increasingly became visible through data systems capable of forecasting long-term collective outcomes. Now, most people focus only on the environmental conclusions of the report while missing the larger transformation underneath it. The true shift was conceptual. Civilization was no longer being interpreted primarily through politics, religion, culture, or national identity. Civilization increasingly became interpreted through systems analysis. The planet itself was reframed as a measurable operational environment requiring coordinated management. So this produced a profound psychological change. Early empires governed territories. The emerging systems worldview governed complexity. Resource management, energy coordination, population modeling, industrial output, agricultural systems, and economic interdependence all became part of a planetary equation. Thus, human civilization increasingly appeared as a machine operating at global scale. And the language of governance slowly shifted towards sustainability, optimization, systems integration, and coordinated management. One of the most controversial developments associated with the Club of Rome was the idea of dividing the world into interconnected regional systems. This was not presented primarily as prophecy or conquest. It was presented as systems administration. Large-scale coordination appeared more practical through regional integration than through isolated national structures. The world increasingly became interpreted through operational zones connected by economics, infrastructure, energy, and communication systems rather than purely through historical borders. This is where continuity with technocratic thinking becomes extremely important. Technocracy imagined North America as a coordinated technate governed through systems management. And the Club of Rome expanded similar systems logic to the planetary level. The underlying assumption remained remarkably consistent. Complex industrial civilizations eventually requires integrated coordination beyond traditional politics. And the scale changed from continental management to planetary management. Think about it like this. Trump said that all of this is a stage, right? This is all just they're all just actors, okay? Also, Castle Rock is one of the companies that hire and film for politics. What it looks like that they're doing is they're making politics just so annoying that we hate it so much that they're going to bring in a solution. Perhaps even Trump could be the person bringing in that solution, a new system that is ran by these data centers that they've produced that controls America, controls the people, and keeps everything at an even keel instead of people being rich and poor. It'll just basically bring everybody back to normal, if there ever is such a thing. But I think that's kind of what's going on here with this idea. And with this new system, it's going to be the beast system. That's what I think. So the language surrounding these ideas sounded humanitarian because much of it genuinely aimed at solving real problems. Pollution, resource depletion, population growth, economic instability, and environmental strain were not imaginary concerns. The danger emerged in the growing belief that civilization itself required centralized systems management in order to survive. Complexity increasingly became justification for expanding computational oversight, predictive modeling, and coordinated administration. Well, the machine civilization evolved another step forward here. Industrial civilization organized production. Cybernetics organized information. Planetary systems theory organized civilization into a global operational model. And humanity increasingly became measurable through statistical forecasting, environmental monitoring, demographic analysis, and economic simulation. Well, the world slowly transformed into a computational object capable of being modeled through machines. And this also prepared the psychological groundwork for future global integration. Once populations begin viewing the planet as one interconnected system facing shared crisis, centralized coordination appears increasingly rational. Environmental instability justified monitoring. Economic instability justified synchronization. Resource scarcity justifies optimization. Crisis becomes the engine driving deeper integration because systems management presents itself as the path toward collective survival. So what it really looks like, and my data shows, is that this was a coordinated event worldwide to get us into a technocratic, machine-controlling world. And it started in the 30s. And whether it was the same people who were in charge of it, well, I don't know. But I've heard people like connect Elon Musk to the technocrats, and yeah, okay, fine. But there needs to be, someone needs to go even deeper, right? And I can only do one show a day. So the spiritual dimension underneath this transformation became more visible as planetary language expanded. Humanity increasingly spoke about global consciousness, planetary stewardship, collective destiny, and interconnected existence. Civilization slowly shifted away from covenant-centered identity towards species-centered identity. And the world itself increasingly became treated as one administratively integrated organism, requiring coordination through systems, expertise, and predictive governance. So the modern world still operates heavily in side assumption inherited from this period. Climate system, global economics, digital infrastructure, supply chains, energy networks, financial markets, and communication platforms are all treated as interconnected systems requiring coordinated management across borders. Artificial intelligence now expands this process even further by offering predictive capabilities previous generations could only imagine. Now, the world is increasingly governed through systems logic because civilization itself has become computationally modeled. So then something unexpected happened during the same decade. Systems theory and planetary governance models were expanding through institutions and think tanks. A completely different culture movement emerged that appeared, at first glance, to reject technocratic civilization entirely. The counterculture movements of the 60s distrusted bureaucracy, industrial conformity, military systems, centralized authority, and rigid social control. Many young people believed industrial society had stripped humanity of meaning, spirituality, and authentic human connection. They were right. Look where we are now. People are so mean to each other. On the surface, the counterculture looked like the opposite of technocracy. One side emphasized systems management, administration, and technological coordination. The other emphasized liberation, consciousness expansion, decentralization, spirituality, creativity, and personal awakening. But beneath the surface, these worlds slowly began converging through cybernetics, computer culture, and network theory. The digital age inherited both streams simultaneously. Figures like Stuart Brand became historically important because they helped merge systems thinking with counterculture idealism. The Whole World Catalog promoted tools, networks, ecological awareness, systems, consciousness, and decentralized technological empowerment. Computers increasingly stopped appearing merely as industrial machines. They began appearing as instruments of liberation, creativity, and planetary connection. So technology itself slowly became spiritualized. And this transformation accelerated through psychedelic culture and consciousness experimentation. Many thinkers within cyber culture began imagining technology not simply as infrastructure, but as an extension of consciousness itself. Networks appeared capable of connecting humanity into new forms of collective awareness. Communication technologies increasingly carried utopian expectations. The internet was not merely information exchange. It was imagined as the foundation for a new planetary civilization built upon openness, connection, and shared intelligence. Well, the idea of the noosphere became especially influential during this period. Teilhard de Chardin proposed that humanity was evolving toward a planetary layer of interconnected consciousness emerging through communication and collective awareness. Well, decades later, many people began interpreting global computer networks almost as physical manifestations of this idea. Humanity increasingly appeared capable of merging into one informational organism connected through technology. And this changed the spiritual psychology surrounding machines. Earlier industrial civilization treated technology primarily as productive power. Cyberculture increasingly treated technology as transformative power. Well, computers promise liberation from isolation. Networks promise collective intelligence. Digital communication promised planetary unity. And virtual environments promised new forms of identity and experience. The machine no longer merely organized civilization externally, it began reshaping human consciousness internally. And Silicon Valley inherited much of this worldview. Modern technology culture often speaks simultaneously in the language of engineering and transcendence. Artificial intelligence is discussed almost religiously. Terms like collective intelligence, global brain, augmented humanity, digital immortality, and planetary consciousness became increasingly normalized. Technology then became carrying the salvific expectations previously associated with religion, philosophy, or even spiritual systems. So this is one of the most important convergences in the entire story because the machine civilization no longer advances purely through administration or force. It advances through aspiration. Humanity increasingly believes technology can solve loneliness, suffering, ignorance, scarcity, conflict, and even mortality itself. Well, the digital age inherited the emotional language of awakening, liberation, evolution, and transcendence. Systems integration began appearing spiritually meaningful rather than merely practical. Well, the internet accelerated this transformation dramatically. Earlier empires centralized through roads and institutions, while the internet centralized through networks of participation. And humanity voluntarily entered digital systems because they appeared empowering and connective. Communication expanded globally, communities formed across borders, information became instantly accessible. Most people experienced these changes as freedom, while deeper forms of dependence quietly developed underneath the surface. So the machine civilization became psychologically seductive because it increasingly mirrored spiritual longing. Human beings desire connection, meaning, transcendence, unity, belonging, and restoration. Technology gradually positioned itself as the mechanism through which these desires could be fulfilled collectively, when we all come together. Well, the digital world promised a form of secular salvation through integration. Humanity increasingly sought transformation through systems rather than covenant. So the spiritual danger here became far deeper than industrial control alone. The machine civilization began offering counterfeit transcendence. Humanity slowly shifted from seeking wisdom through God towards seeking evolution through networks, data systems, and technological augmentation. Well, the language changed, but the temptation remained ancient. Humanity reaching toward collective ascent apart from divine authority. So it created new forms of worship centered around connection, intelligence, integration, and the promise of becoming more than human through the machine itself. More human than human. Had to throw that one in there for boots. So the internet originally appeared to many people as a decentralized frontier. Information moved freely, communication crossed borders instantly, individuals suddenly possessed publishing power once reserved for institutions. Well, the early digital world felt open, liberating, and almost impossible to control. Most people believed technology was dispersing power away from centralized authority structures. Few recognized that the real product of the digital age was not information itself. The real product was human behavior. Platforms slowly transformed the internet from a network of communications into a system of behavioral extraction. Every search, click, purchase, pause, reaction, location, message, and preference became measurable data. Human intention itself became economically valuable because Attention revealed patterns. Patterns reveal predictability. Predictability creates profit. And the modern internet economy evolved around harvesting human behavior at scales previous civilizations could never imagine. Well, this fundamentally changed the relationship between humanity and technology. Earlier industrial systems extracted physical labor. The digital world extracts behavioral data. Human beings no longer simply use platforms. Human activity continuously trains systems designed to model thought, emotion, preference, influence, and future decision making. Well, the user gradually became the resource being mined. Most people still believe they are customers inside digital systems when, increasingly, they are the product being analyzed. Recommendation systems became one of the most powerful developments in modern civilization because they quietly transformed visibility itself. Algorithms increasingly determine which information people encounter, which ideas spread, which emotions amplify, and which narratives gain traction. Human perception is now partially mediated through machine systems optimized for engagement rather than truth. And the architecture governing visibility increasingly shapes culture itself. So this created an entire new form of power. Previous empires controlled populations through territory, military, centralized media, while digital platforms shape populations through attention management. Human beings increasingly inhabit environments engineered to maximize emotional reaction, behavioral retention, and predictive engagement. Well, the machine civilization no longer simply observes behavior, it actively influences conditions behavior continuously. So surveillance capitalism expanded because prediction became extraordinarily valuable. Corporations discovered that data could be used not merely to understand populations, but to anticipate and shape future decisions. Advertising evolved into behavioral engineering. Human psychology became computational territory. Emotional reactions, fears, desires, relationships, political tendencies, and social patterns all became measurable inputs feeding predictive systems. The frightening part is how invisible most of this remains during ordinary life. Phones feel personal. Social platforms feel voluntary. Recommendation systems feel convenient. Digital assistants feel helpful, yet behind the surface, machine learning systems continuously model human behavior in real time. Entire populations are increasingly translated into psychographic profiles, behavioral clusters, influence patterns, and predictive probabilities. Civilization itself is becoming behaviorally legible to machines. So this transformed economics as well. Human experience increasingly became raw material feeding computational systems. Attention generates advertising revenue. Engagement trains algorithms. Participation produces data. Social interaction becomes measurable infrastructure. The digital world slowly converted human existence into a continuous stream of extractable information. And most people never consciously agreed to this transformation because the systems were introduced gradually through convenience and entertainment. Artificial intelligence accelerated the process dramatically because AI systems thrive on data abundance. The more information systems collect, the more effectively they model patterns and optimize prediction. Human beings increasingly live inside environments where algorithms continuously learn from collective behavior. The machine civilization improves itself by observing civilization itself, and every interaction feeds the system. And this is where the internet ceased being merely a communication tool and became infrastructure for behavioral governance. Visibility, participation, influence, commerce, and information flow increasingly depend upon systems optimized through machine learning. Entire populations now encounter reality through algorithmic, filtered environments. And human perception itself is increasingly mediated through computational architectures designed around prediction and engagement. The spiritual danger hidden inside surveillance capitalism is profound because it slowly conditions humanity to externalize discernment. Systems increasingly decide what people see, what people value, what people fear, what people purchase, and what people emotionally react to. Well, human attention becomes programmable terrain. Civilization quietly shifts from internally guided conscience toward externally guided behavioral influence. So the machine does not merely organize information anymore. It increasingly shapes human desire itself. It's already started, folks. The beast system described in Scripture reaches into buying, selling, participation, and allegiance. Surveillance capitalism revealed something critical about modern civilization. Populations willingly surrender extraordinary amounts of behavioral visibility in exchange for convenience, access, entertainment, and connection. Well, the architecture for continuous behavior monitoring already exists because humanity voluntarily built its life inside the machine long before fully understanding what the machine was becoming. And cities are no longer being designed simply as places for people to live. They are increasingly being redesigned as integrated computational environments. Roads, traffic systems, utilities, cameras, sensors, communication networks, electrical grids, transportation systems, emergency response systems, and public services are all becoming connected through real-time data infrastructure. The modern city is slowly transforming into a machine capable of monitoring, analyzing, predicting, and responding continuously. Most people experience these changes through convenience. Traffic lights become more efficient. Navigation systems reduce congestion. Utilities optimizes energy use. Cameras improve security. Digital payment systems accelerate commerce. Sensors monitor infrastructure where before failures even occur. And every individual layer appears rational and practical, but underneath the surface, the city itself increasingly behaves like a nervous system collecting information from millions of interconnected data points simultaneously. So smart cities represent one of the clearest examples of civilization shifting from political administration toward computational governance. Decisions increasingly emerge from data analysis, predictive systems, automated monitoring, and machine-assisted coordination rather than solely through visible human administration. Human behavior itself becomes integrated into infrastructure management because populations generate the data required to optimize the systems surrounding them. Well, this transformation depends heavily upon identity synchronization. A computational civilization cannot fully function without machine-readable participants. Digital identity systems increasingly becomes the bridge connecting communication, commerce, transportation, healthcare, finance, employment, and social participation all together. So the more integrated civilization becomes, the more valuable unified digital identity becomes for maintaining system coordination. Now, most people still interpret digital identity as a merely security tool, but identity systems increasingly function as an administrative infrastructure. Authentication determines access. Verification determines participation. Databases increasingly mediate movement, finance, communication, healthcare, employment, and public visibility all simultaneously. Well, civilizations gradually reorganizes itself around interoperable systems requiring standardized forms of machine recognizable identity. Biometric technologies accelerate this process even further. Fingerprints, facial recognition, voice analysis, retinal scans, behavioral patterns, and location histories increasingly become components inside digital verification systems. And Apple got all of that from you. Human identity slowly migrates from relational recognition toward computational recognition. Participation increasingly depends upon validation through machines rather than through the communities or direct human interaction. And the financial system is evolving in parallel with these developments. Cashless systems, digital wallets, programmable payment infrastructures, algorithmic fraud detection, and centralized transaction monitoring all expand machine visibility into economic participation. Commerce itself becomes increasingly synchronized through digital systems capable of authorization, restriction, monitoring, and behavioral analysis in real time. So this creates a civilization where infrastructure, identity, and participation begin merging together operationally. Transportation systems connect with payment systems connect with identity systems with behavioral analysis and analytics with predictive governance systems. The modern world increasingly functions through interoperability, and independent systems quietly become one integrated environment. So artificial intelligence dramatically amplifies the power of this architecture because AI systems can process enormous amounts of behavioral and infrastructural information simultaneously. Predictive systems begin identifying movement patterns, consumption habits, risk behaviors, emotional trends, financial anomalies, and social influence networks in real time. And governance increasingly shifts from reactive administration toward anticipatory management. Civilization then slowly becomes prediction-centered. So the frightening part is how normal these systems feel while they completely expand. People adapt too quickly to convenience. And phones become wallets. Wallets become identity systems. Identity systems become access systems. And access systems become participation. So humanity gradually accepts mediation through infrastructure because frictionless living feels efficient and safe. Dependence grows incrementally, while participation itself becomes inseparable from computational systems. So previous empires required visible enforcement because infrastructure remained limited. Modern computational civilization increasingly governs through conditional access. Well, visibility can be adjusted algorithmically. Financial participation can be restricted digitally. Communication reach can be modified computationally, and identity itself can become dependent upon authorization through centralized systems. So the architecture emerging all around the world possesses capabilities previous empires could never, ever achieve. The spiritual danger inside the transformation is not merely surveillance, it's mediation. Civilization increasingly moves toward a condition where systems stand between the individual and participation in reality itself. Human beings slowly become dependent upon machine-recognized identity for movement, commerce, communication, and visibility. And the more integrated the systems become, the easier it becomes for participation itself to depend upon compliance with the structure governing the machine civilization. So can you guys not see the beast system coming from all of this? No, Trump is not the Antichrist. He is an Antichrist, and he's working for the bad guys. The bad guys are all the tech companies who are all working for the devil. Now, they won't admit it. Oh, well, Mark Zuckerberg, didn't he say that he once tried adrenochrome? He's like, well, I was hanging out with Epstein. My point is, we can't prove that these guys are doing it, but the way that they act and that the way that they the rich keep getting richer, the poor keeps getting poorer. It's their actions. There's no fruit that comes from any of these systems. So artificial intelligence represents a turning point unlike anything industrial civilization has experienced before, because earlier machines primarily replaced physical labor while preserving human judgment. Well, AI increasingly moves beyond labor into cognition itself. Systems are now capable of generating language, analyzing behavior, recognizing patterns, predicting decisions, producing images, and interpreting medical scans, managing logistics, filtering information, and automating forms of reasoning once considered uniquely human. That's happening. Civilization is entering an age where machines no longer merely extend human capability. They increasingly mediate human interpretation of reality itself. Most people still think about AI primarily as a tool, but AI functions more like an infrastructure layer sitting above all previous systems. It consumes data from communication networks, financial systems, transportation systems, behavioral analytics, cloud infrastructure, surveillance systems, and digital identity environments simultaneously. And the more integrated civilization becomes, the more powerful artificial intelligence becomes, because AI depends upon massive interconnected streams of measurable human activity. While this creates an enormous concentration of power around computation itself, data centers now require staggering amounts of electricity, water, rare earth minerals, fiber infrastructure, semiconductor manufacturing, and centralized capital investment. Artificial intelligence is not floating in cyberspace. It depends upon physical infrastructure operating at a planetary scale. And whoever controls compute infrastructure increasingly controls visibility, prediction, optimization, and information flow across civilization itself. So whoever's in this AI race is going to take over the world, it looks like. So the machine civilization is also changing humanity's relationship with knowledge. Search engines already transformed memory by externalizing information storage into networks. Remember, people used to have phone numbers they used to remember. Now they can't remember shit. Artificial intelligence expands this process by externalizing judgment and synthesis. More people increasingly rely upon systems to summarize information, recommend decisions, filter complexity, and interpret reality. While human discernment gradually shifts outward into machines-mediated environments because the system appears faster, more informed, and more efficient than individuals. While this creates a subtle but profound psychological dependency, as civilization increasingly trusts systems not merely to provide information, but to determine relevance itself. Algorithms rank visibility, AI filters communication, recommendation systems shape exposure, predictive systems guide behavior. Human beings increasingly inhabit realities curated computationally rather than discovered organically. Thus, the machine civilization slowly becomes epistemological infrastructure, a system defining how populations encounter truth. And the labor consequences alone are staggering. Earlier industrial automation replaced repetitive physical work, while artificial intelligence increasingly threatens cognitive professions once considered secure. Writing, analysis, administration, accounting, law, education, logistics, finance, customer service, and even portions of scientific research increasingly become automatable through machine systems. Human economic participation slowly disconnects from necessity because machines become capable of replacing both labor and decision-making simultaneously. So, this creates enormous pressure for centralized coordinated systems. If populations become economically displaced while production becomes increasingly automated, then civilization requires new mechanics for distribution, identity management, and social stability. Universal income proposals, programmable financial systems, digital identity infrastructure, and behavioral governance, all models, all emerge within this context because industrial civilization increasingly struggles to maintain older economic structures built around human labor participation. Well, the concentration effects become critical here. Artificial intelligence naturally rewards scale because larger systems possess more data, more compute, more infrastructure, more predictive capability. Boots. Yep, can't remember shit. Plus, I shit every morning at 5 a.m., but I don't wake up till 7. Oh, that sucks. I'd hate to clean your bed. I could go on and on and on. So civilizations, guys, often believe that they are progressing simply because their tools become more advanced. Faster communication feels like wisdom, greater efficiency feels like order, prediction feels like understanding, and integration feels like unity. Well, the modern world measures progress technologically while rarely asking what kind of humanity is being produced underneath the systems surrounding it. A civilization can become more connected while simultaneously becoming more spiritually disconnected from truth, conscience, and God. The machine civilization did not appear suddenly. It evolved gradually through centuries of administrative expansion, industrial optimization, systems management, cybernetics, digital infrastructure, behavioral analytics, and artificial intelligence. Well, every stage solved real problems. Every stage increased capability. Every stage made civilization more interconnected and measurable. But every stage also increased dependence upon systems way too large, way too complex, and too centralized for ordinary people to meaningfully understand or control. Why we're spending trillions for data centers when we still can't feed 8,000 children that die every year or every day of hunger. So the deeper issue is never technology alone. Roads are not evil. Databases are not evil. Artificial intelligence itself is not the beast. The danger emerges when civilization begins transferring trust, authority, discernment, identity, and participation into systems while spiritually disconnecting those systems from God. Humanity increasingly seeks external coordination to solve internal disorder, and the machine promises what only covenant and transformation were ever meant to provide: peace, stability, wisdom, belonging, security, and transcendence. Well, none of this means retreating into fear or paranoia. Fear clouds discernment just as effectively as blind optimism. The goal here is clarity. Human beings were never meant to surrender authorship to systems. People were never designed to derive ultimate identity from databases, algorithms, institutions, or machine recognition. Civilizations became spiritually unstable whenever it seeks salvation through structures rather than through God. And the machine can organize society, but it cannot redeem the human heart. Rome eventually collapsed because every empire built upon centralized human power eventually decays under its own weight. And the modern world may believe computational systems will finally solve the instability previous civilizations could not overcome. Artificial intelligence may appear capable of governing complexity beyond human capacity, but systems built without spiritual truth eventually become instruments of domination because they attempt to replace what they cannot truly create. An order without God always drifts toward control because the human condition remains unresolved underneath the infrastructure. Well, the final danger is not simply technological control. The final danger is worship. Humanity increasingly places faith in systems promising peace, prediction, unity, abundance, and transcendence while drifting further from the covenant, repentance, humility, and truth. The beast system described in Scripture ultimately represents a civilization trusting the counterfeit kingdom more than the Creator himself. And that is the road stretching from Rome to the cloud. A civilization slowly surrendering its soul to the machine it built with its own hand.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.